Good morning and welcome to our Bible study for this week. We have a guest with us today. It's not Phil, it's Brandon Bowen. Brandon, it was one of our newly elected deacons. Phil's actually taking a little break from school. They went to school 1 week and then they had fall break, so he had to rest up from that first week of school. But anyway, Brandon's with us today and he's going to help us as we go through this final series in the lessons in the series on 10 Commandments. The last 6 commandments actually deal with our relationships to other people. Correct. And we're looking at the last 3 of those today. Have you ever, I imagine most of you all, and Brandon, I imagine you have seen a picture or a video of a building being demolished. How
Yes.
they implode those buildings and they fall right into the footprint that they actually were built on. And it's amazing they can do that with a few well-placed explosives, and it doesn't even harm the buildings around it.
Right.
It's amazing how they can do that. What they do with those explosives, they destroy the structural integrity of the building. It's not a whole lot unlike our lives, Brandon. When we lose our integrity, when we do things that are not what God wants us to do, when we lie, when we steal, when we give false testimony, then we are destroying our integrity.
Correct.
And it tears us down just exactly like it does when they implode one of those buildings. One life that we tell can collapse a friendship that's been years building. One slanderous accusation can tear down another person and also can destroy our the feelings that people have toward us, the perception people have toward us. And then one wrong choice of words or deeds that we do can tear up years of good deeds we've done.
Correct.
We have to be careful the way we live our lives. And that's what these final 3 commandments are about. So let's look at them real quick in Exodus chapter 20.
Yeah.
If you want to take off there with, excuse me, if you want to take off those verses, we'll go from there.
You know, one thing just to kind of go on with what you were talking about, you know, like we learned in the previous lessons, was that it's very hard to build a relationship with someone that we do not trust.
Exactly.
Or someone that, and it's just like, you know, where you're talking about tearing down the building and we tear down our own integrity with our relationships.
Yep.
It's almost impossible to come up with a meaningful relationship with someone if we don't trust them.
Exactly.
And just like you were saying, one little act can just totally destroy that.
And that's bad, but that's the way life is, because you can spend a lifetime doing good things.
Yes.
And you got to be on guard every hour of every day, every minute of every day.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct. So starting off here, we're looking at Exodus chapter 20, verses 15 and 16. Verse 15, do not steal. Verse 16, do not give false testimony against your neighbor. So we're going to be looking at that. Let's start with stealing. Okay, so what are things that we can steal? Things that we can steal, it doesn't have to be a tangible item. I can steal your pen out of your pocket. I can steal your house. I can steal, there's all kinds of things that can be stolen. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't have to be that tangible item. It can be, you know, just like we're going to be looking at in a minute, it could be a person, kidnapping. It can be also another thing that we talk about is stealing time from your employer. When you're paid to do a job and you're watching that clock tick by and you're not being productive, you're being paid to do a job. And that is, in essence, stealing time and money from your employer.
Right. Now you're picking on us.
Yeah, well, yeah.
We are. We need that.
It can be that, but it's just like when we talk about little white lies. It's one of those things that we kind of brush under the rug. We don't think about it, but unfortunately, it is the same thing. It has the same sinful impact on our relationship with God as stealing anything else.
Yes.
And you know, another thing that I like about these verses is they're vague. Do not steal. It doesn't give it doesn't say what not to steal, and it also does not give any leeway. It does not give any exceptions or buts. Do not steal. The end. You know?
Do not steal unless you're hungry. Do not steal
Correct.
unless you need money. It doesn't say that.
It does not
Do
say that.
steal.
That's right. You've heard of stealing in hunger. It doesn't say that you can steal in hunger. So that, I like how they're so vague because it encompasses so much, you know. And in the end, when you think about it, God is the ultimate owner of absolutely everything. It says so. We see that evidenced in 1 Chronicles chapter 29, verse 11, Job chapter 41, verse 11, and the 24th Psalm, verse 1. Possessions themselves also, physical items, tangible items, they are not inherently good or evil. You know, God does not prohibit the owning of property, but possessions can be used to draw a person away from God, such as idolatry. You know, you can idolize a pair of socks, and that's what you want. That's a possession. We're going to look at covetousness here in just a moment, but, you know, items themselves are not evil or good. Items can be given in a godly manner to perpetuate His kingdom just as easily as they can draw people away from God, JR.
Exactly.
So that's stealing. Now we're going to move on. We're going to look at verse 16. Do not give false testimony against your neighbor. So when we go into court, we swear an oath to tell the truth, right? The telling of the truth is a cornerstone of the integrity of not only a person, but of the society, because disputes will always happen. Disputes will happen between the best and worst of us. Judges will rely on truthful evidence to make correct and just judgments. Okay? So, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay. So, telling lies on another person and withholding information is also falling under this commandment of giving false testimony. God emphasizes truth in His commandment, as God is the God of truth, as we see in Isaiah chapter 65, verse 16, and He does not ever lie. In fact, in Proverbs chapter 6, verse 16 through 19, I was talking about this the other day when we were talking about marriages, but there's that 16 through 19 tells us of 7 things that God hates. 2 of which, well, one of which is a lying tongue and the other is a lying witness. So there we see lacks of truth again. And then when we say, and it says false testimony against your neighbor, it doesn't mean the person who's living next to you.
Right.
It comes from the Hebrew word reh, and that refers not only to, in that time it referred not only to the Israelites, but also the non-Israelites, which were considered outsiders. Therefore, that is anybody you could encounter on a daily basis. Anybody you encounter in your life is considered a neighbor.
A neighbor, right.
A
Anybody
neighbor.
you come in contact with.
Correct. Anybody you come in contact with. So we see that recurring theme in these two verses. We see that theme of integrity in our actions and in our speech. Stealing is an action. Giving false testimony is our speech. Okay? And so living a life of integrity not only brings glory to God, but it also advances and perpetuates His kingdom here on earth. It starts with our thoughts and comes out in our actions and our words. So yeah, that is stealing and giving false testimony.
I like there's some verse there that's quoted in our lesson.
Yeah.
That Brandon talks about the Lord is a God of truth, but it also talks about what the devil is called. The devil is a liar and a father of lies,
Right.
and there is no truth in him. That comes from John chapter 8. When we participate in lying, we are giving an example not of God, but of the devil.
Correct.
And we're as Christians, we need to be an example of people to follow that point them toward God and not toward the devil.
Correct.
Excuse me. Can we steal something from people that's not a possession, not something they own? And I think this tells us here that we can. When it says do not steal, then it says do not give false testimony. If we tell something wrong, if we lie on a person or tell something that causes them to lose their integrity, then we're stealing from them. We're stealing their integrity from them. When we
correct.
tell a falsehood against someone, and it was amazing to me, if you watch these debates, both sides, that's a lie, that's a lie, that's a lie. It doesn't matter which side it is, Brandon. Whatever one of them says, the other says the opposite's true.
Yes,
And you don't know who to believe.
correct.
And it's a sad state of affairs that we are at the point we are in our political career, but in our political way of life today. But you can steal something besides something that somebody owes. You can steal their integrity by telling something false against them.
That's correct.
And that's probably, in some cases, that's even worse
Mhm.
than stealing something from them.
Yes. Yeah, and it's also sad in a way, JR, that we've become so good at lying that some people can become so well at lying that's not a characteristic I hold up for anybody.
No.
Is their ability to tell a lie so well.
We need to start working on that with our kids and grandkids when they're small.
That's correct.
Because having kids of your own, they can tell little lies even
Yes,
at a
they
young
can.
age. And you never condone that or never praise that or never allow them to do that at all.
Correct.
And they need to find out early on that truthfulness is, as what it says, truthfulness next to godliness. Maybe that's cleanliness next to godliness.
Well,
but truthfulness is too.
it is too, yes.
Because that's what God is. God is
Right.
truth.
And so not only just stealing, just to kind of go on with that just a little bit more, also destroying someone else's property.
Yeah.
Although you're not taking it for yourself, you're keeping it from them, you know?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so that in essence is also stealing from someone, is when you take it from someone that is already their possession, you destroy it where they can't have it, it's the same as stealing.
Yep.
So,
And you talked earlier about stealing time for your employee. Of course, 20 years ago, you weren't on the internet 25 years ago.
right,
But when you take pens home, that's not a big deal. Well,
Right.
you take a ream of paper home because you need some for your
Mhm.
printer. That's a stealing. That is
Mhm.
stealing. It's just like any other kind of stealing that you can think about. And then you get on the time part. Yeah.
yeah,
We're paid. I was paid to do an honest day's work, and that includes getting there 10 minutes late and leaving 10 minutes early.
yeah,
All those things are considered to be stealing in God's eyes.
correct.
It's tough.
It is.
You gotta get home and mow the yard.
Yeah.
Gotta get that ball game, that baseball game or the
Yeah.
soccer game or whatever it is.
All right, so we're gonna look at the second section. We're gonna look
Yeah.
at moving on. I believe that's supposed to be a 17 right there, but it's at
Yeah, it
7.
is supposed to
but
be a
yeah,
17.
It's all right. It kind of threw me off this morning. So we're looking at we're going to the go ahead.
No, I said, huh?
We're going on to the next verse. Exodus, still in chapter 20, verse 17. Do not covet your neighbor's house. Do not covet your neighbor's wife, his male or female servant, his ox or his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. We're going to define neighbor like we defined neighbor in the previous ones,
Right,
okay?
right.
It's anybody you come in contact with. So we first look at these verses deal with an internal attitude
Right.
rather than an external action. But as we've learned in the previous lessons, JR, anything that comes to mind will affect your heart and will affect your actions.
Eventually will come out at some point. in
It
time,
sure will.
Unless you do something about it.
It sure will.
Yeah.
So, God sees our heart. We learned that in Samuel. He knows how we think and feel, and these thoughts, they lead to defiance of the other commandments. Idolatry, adultery, stealing, and even sometimes murder. And so coveting is to crave or desire or to want something. That can be, again, positive or negative, but it's still something that's desired. Okay? And then when we look at the house, your neighbor's house doesn't just refer to the structure of the dwelling that
Right,
your neighbor
right,
lives
right.
in, That refers to his family, that refers to all of his possessions.
His belongings.
Just like we talked about in the previous ones. stealing is not just a tangible item. It could be anything. Again, that's your neighbor's house. And we look at a few examples. We look at his wife, male or female servant, ox and donkey. But then I like how he wraps it up. Or anything, again, anything that belongs to your neighbor.
His goat.
A blade of grass sitting in his yard, it does not matter. If that belongs to him,
That rock over there in the corner that you've been stumbling over when you walk over to his house, don't take it home with you. Leave
right.
it there with him.
that's right. That's his.
Yep.
So again, we envelop all the things that your neighbor owns and all the people that you encounter.
Why do we, and maybe you're going to cover this, but why do we covet things that we don't have? What are some reasons why, or, what's the purpose of coveting or wanting something that someone else has?
That stems from our dissatisfaction.
Okay.
That comes from the dissatisfaction of what we have.
Okay, so we're not satisfied with what we have
Right.
in most cases.
Just
Okay.
like salesmen with their sales pitches.
Okay,
They will sometimes give you evidence in a way that makes you feel dissatisfied that
Okay.
you didn't even know you were dissatisfied with it.
right.
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 You just need maybe looking at a new car and this has this and this and this. Your car now doesn't have that. Well, oh my, I didn't realize I didn't have that,
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
and how much better my life would be with it.
Yeah,
Right.
right.
So,
Alexa. I didn't know that. I didn't know you could buy a car that had Alexa built into it.
Yeah.
That's the newest car commercial. I forget what brand it is. It's a Buick. And,
Okay.
And they stress the fact that Buicks now have Alexa built into them.
Okay.
Well, I don't have that.
Yeah.
Gosh, I can't just say, Alexa, tell me where the restaurant is, where the nearest McDonald's is with sweet tea. And it will.
Yeah.
So I want that.
Yes, sir. I mean, I'm
So
not
we're-
about buying things when I'm driving anyway, but
So it's because we are discontented with what we have.
yes,
Okay.
we're dissatisfied with
Dissatisfied
what we
with what
have.
we have.
Yes, and discontent.
Okay.
So, JR, would you say that our dissatisfaction with and discontentment with the things in our life is a way of saying, yeah, Lord, I've got you, but you're just not enough?
The Bible tells us that God will give us everything we not want, but everything we need, provide everything we need. If we can ever get to that point in our lives and say, yeah, I'm content with what you have given me, then I think that would be great.
Mm-hmm.
But we sometimes we're not, and when we're not content with what God has given us, because we know, Brandon, that everything we have, not just our possessions, but the job we have, the family we have, all those things come from God.
Mm-hmm.
And we get to that point, and if we're not at that point, yeah, I think it reflects on the fact that we are not satisfied with what God has done for us.
Correct.
And that's probably a sad place to be. It also reflects to non-Christians around that we're not satisfied with God.
Mhm.
And we should be satisfied with God, obviously. But we're really not hurting other people, Brandon. If I covet a car, if I covet whatever it is, a set of golf clubs, it doesn't matter what it is, I'm really not hurting anybody but myself, am I?
Oh, really? Just
That's not what that says, is it?
well, no, that's I'd have to
What-
disagree with that, JR.
What does coveting in our heart lead to in our actions?
It will always come out
It
every single time.
leads to doing whatever we can to obtain that thing we're coveting,
That's correct.
whether it's a possession.
It could be
in most cases, that's what it is.
A position at a job.
Position at a job,
It could be, yeah.
doing things that are not integrity-wise are not good to get promoted.
Mhm.
Anytime we covet something, it leads to other issues down the road.
Mm-hmm.
And as you said before, it could lead to stealing.
Yep.
It could lead to adultery.
Mhm.
It could lead to even murder. You've
Yes.
already mentioned those before. So I think the writer there says in one place that circumstances or stuff should never drive our commitment or our contentment.
Correct. Should never dictate whether we're happy with our lives.
Paul said in Philippians, let me read this for you. Paul said, I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances I find myself. I know both how to make do with little, and I know how to make do with a lot. Whether in abundance or in need, I am able to do all things through him who strengthens me. In Paul's lifetime, in his Christian lifetime, he saw everything. He was in prison as much as he was out, probably. He was beaten, he was stoned, and they thought he was dead. But there were other times when he was in abundance, when he would be at a town where people loved him, where the families would take him in, and he had everything he wanted. He said, it doesn't matter whether I have a whole lot or whether I have a little. I'm content, and I know how to make it on what I have.
Right.
Boy, it'd be great, wouldn't it?
It would be.
That'd be great, to be in that point in your life. And he said, I know that because of who gives it to me.
Right.
God strengthens me.
Because he found himself in a whole lot of circumstances.
He did.
A whole lot of varying circumstances, like we learned.
That last, I don't know if you caught that one or not, covetousness is ultimately a sin against God.
Correct.
And this is exactly what you said, because it reflects dissatisfaction with what he has provided.
Correct.
When you think about it in those terms, that's tough.
Yeah.
That's tough.
That's
You see, ultimately a sin against God, and because it reflects us being dissatisfied with what he has provided for us.
Right.
So we need to steer away from covetousness if at all possible.
Right.
Right?
Correct. And another thing about covetousness is if you covet something and then you acquire it, what have you? You're going to covet something else after that.
Oh, you're not
it.
satisfied then?
Yeah, no. No, because you may have this new car, but there's also the new watch of the one that you got on your wrist. You want that now.
Yeah.
You know, so we lose our selves when we get what we want, when we covet something, and then let's say like I was saying, a pair of socks. Let's say I just can't live without these socks I see, so I'll order them. They come in the mail. It's done. There you go. You've got what you want. But there's going to be something else that comes after that you're going to want. So the covetousness and the covetous nature doesn't really go away in the acquisition. It's never satisfied.
Just keeps on growing.
And when I think about things here on earth, okay, one of my favorite passages is from Matthew chapter 6, verse 19 through 21. Do not store up for yourself treasures on earth, where moth and rust decay and thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also.
That's exactly right. And
Yep.
that actually leads into the last verse is pretty good, because we're going to find that people in David's time were concerned about the fact that people who did store up things on earth and seemed to have a lot of possessions, that they were getting by with things and having more than those who were Christians who were struggling, who at that time were following God's will, but they were struggling.
Right.
In fact, we look at Psalms chapter 37. Like I said, some people were upset that it appeared that evil people were getting by better than those who were following the Lord. And he says there in chapter 37 of Psalms, verses 1 through 6, do not be agitated by evildoers. Do not envy those who do wrong. For they will wither quickly like grass and will wilt like tender green plants. Trust in the Lord and do what is good. Dwell in the land and live securely. Take delight in the Lord, and he will give your heart's desires. Your heart's desires. Commit your way to the Lord. Trust in him, and he will act, making your righteousness shine like the dawn, your justice like the noonday. People were concerned at that time that people who were doing evil things were prospering.
Mhm.
And they were envying those people because of it. And David just strictly says, don't envy them. Don't be concerned about what they're gaining here on earth. Now, haven't we all made that statement? So-and-so gets by with everything.
Right.
He never seems to get caught. She never seems to get caught. They're always doing, their business is doing well, but we know they're not honest in their dealings. We've all heard that. We've all heard that.
Right.
We've all said it. But David says, don't worry about it. And then in verse 2, he tells us why. He says, they will wither quickly like grass, and wilt like tender green plants.
Yes.
They're going to prosper for a while, but their ultimate fate is God's judgment.
Correct.
And we need to, and I know we believe this, but it's hard to realize, hard to imagine it, that when they die, their judgment's going to be eternity in hell, separated from God, if they're not believers. Most time believers would not do things like it's
Right.
talking about there.
Correct.
But so we don't need to worry. We don't need to be agitated about it. Just know that they're going to get their judgment at some point in time in the future.
Correct.
Okay. Then he goes on in verse 3 to tell us that instead of being agitated by evildoers and envying those people,
Mhm.
we should trust in the Lord and do what is good, dwell in the land and live securely. What does it mean to trust in God? I think it means to depend on God rather than
Yes.
on ourselves.
That's correct.
Have confidence in who God is and what God does for us.
Mhm.
When
Yeah.
we do those, we'll be trusting in Him. And He says, do that rather than envying people.
Right. Like
Then
look back in Exodus from where we read these others. When they were traveling, they didn't have food to take with
No.
them, but they trusted in the Lord,
Mhm.
and He delivered manna, just what they needed.
Can you imagine eating the same sausage biscuit every morning for?
If you're hungry enough, you'll eat anything.
Well, I almost eat a sausage biscuit every morning, but not quite. I skip a day. Every once in a while, I have a sausage McMuffin.
Oh man, mix it up a little bit,
Mix
huh?
it up a little.
Oh
Then he
man,
says there to do what is good. In other words, we obey God's laws and
Yes.
His words. Strive to do that in our life. And it says, then if you do that, you'll dwell in the land and live securely. We need to be content with where God has placed us, not physically, but that too, but
Mhm.
in life. We're our station in life. We need to be content with what God has done for us. And so that's what David says do. Trust in the Lord, do what's good, and then you will dwell in the land and live securely. Then he goes on further and says, take delight in the Lord, trust Him, and He will act. No, trust Him. Take delight in the Lord, and He will give you your heart's desires. What does it mean to take delight in God? What are some things in your family that you take delight in?
oh, my kids are the first thing that come to
Your
mind.
children,
You know,
right?
the things that they do and don't do or whatever.
As parents and as grandparents, the first thing we want to do when we see somebody we haven't seen for a while is show them our grandchildren, our grandchildren. Brag on what they've been doing.
That's right.
Sometimes too ad nausea with people. This is what mine can do this. Well, mine can do this. Well, mine can do this. We take delight in our children and find pleasure and satisfaction in the things that they do.
Yes.
And that's what he's saying that we should do in God. We should take delight in the Lord. We should take the same delight and find the same satisfaction and pleasure in God that we do with our children and our grandchildren. Because of what He does for us. We know how they make us feel when we're proud of them.
Yes.
All the time, whether we're proud of them or not at that particular time. We
Yeah.
can always find something to be proud of. But in order to do that, Brandon, take satisfaction in God and be proud, find pleasure in Him, we must know Him and know that His will for us in our lives. We have to know God first to take pleasure in Him.
Yes.
And be satisfied with, and find pleasure and satisfaction in what He does for us.
Correct.
And when we do that, when we know Him at that point, at that amount of that level, then we will know His will for our lives,
Yes.
and we'll take pleasure also in what He has in store for us and what He wants us to do.
Yes.
When we get to that point, then we have become a very mature Christian. We're content with what He wants us to do, know Him to that point, and find pleasure and satisfaction, and are able to share that pleasure and satisfaction in the things He's done for us with neighbors we come in contact
Yes.
with, a lot of whom are not believers.
Right.
And then in verses 5 and 6, he says, commit your way to the Lord. Trust in Him, and He will act, making your righteousness shine like the dawn, with your justice like the noonday. What does it mean to commit to God?
Fully trust every aspect of your life to His will. That's what.
Exactly what it means. I was thinking of in
Yeah.
your case, you committed your life to God this past spring when you chose to go out on a new venture, start a business. I'm sure you prayed for that for hours
Yes,
and
I
hours
did.
and days and months, and it took a while for it to happen.
Took a little bit, yeah.
But you
And it
committed.
didn't happen quite a few times.
It didn't happen. We have to be content not only with turning our lives over to Him, but turning our lives over to Him and Him acting on His timetable and not our timetable.
Correct.
When we decide we want to do something, normally we say, jump in, let's get it done today.
Mhm.
God doesn't work like that. Sometimes God wants us to wait for things. And that's what and you, in your case, you had to wait, but it was well worth the wait.
Mhm.
But we need to give our life entirely to God, including our burdens, including our frustrations with how people around us seem to be prospering and we're not. We also need to give Him the good times we have, turn them all over to Him, and then when we do that, God will make our righteousness shine like the dawn.
Yeah.
Look at the difference in example we are for non-believers when we're committing to God, trusting in God, not stealing, not lying, not coveting, but yet being completely satisfied with what God has done for us. Look what our example would be when and in our lives, whenever we're trying to go out and witness for Him, show Him through the way we live, then that's what He's going to make us look like, is righteousness that shines like the dawn.
Yes.
Beautiful.
It is beautiful. And just one little quick thing. There at the beginning, we were talking about agitated by evildoers
Right.
and envying things that they do wrong. The world has a way of glorifying wrongdoings in such a manner that it makes the non-believers or even some believers envious of that. I think back to a few years ago, several years ago actually, a certain person who was running the world's biggest Ponzi scheme, they said.
Yeah.
Lived like a king, millions or billions of dollars worth of value, and it all came crashing down, didn't it?
Yep.
Just like the building that imploded.
Yep.
But still, when we think of the schemes, we think of the evil things that bring prosperity to those who don't believe, it's easy to say, man, I wish I lived that lifestyle. But again, that's an evildoer, and that's not something, evil doings, that's not something you want to look forward to.
And that lifestyle lasts a split second compared to eternity.
Fraction, yes.
Compared to spending an eternity. And I know hell's hot, and I know there's all kinds of things that says where the worm doesn't die and all this stuff. But to me, the worst part about hell is being separated from every goodness that you can ever think of.
Yes.
There is no goodness in hell. There is no love in hell. There is no God in hell.
Correct.
And when you're mixed in with all that evil, you just think of the worst things that happen here on earth. That's what you're going to be living in for eternity. Not tomorrow, but eternity.
Right.
Versus all the goodness you see and the love you see that you're going to live with for eternity. This wraps up, Brandon,
Yeah.
our lesson on the Ten Commandments. Now, next quarter, next sessions, I think, is starting with a life of commitment, what it means to be committed to God.
Yes.
We're probably going to start looking at those next week. Thank you for being with us today.
Well, thank you for
Brandon,
having
and
me.
We enjoyed this.
My pleasure.
We have several that are ill. We won't try to mention any names today. Just continue to remember those that you know about that are hurting. Remember our church. Remember our staff as they strive to do and lead us in the right direction. We'll see you all next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you.